In this video, I'll be replacing the AC compressor solenoid valve in this third generation Kia Optima to get it back to having ice-cold air. With the clutchless compressor in this model, this solenoid valve is what controls the flow of refrigerant in the system. It's a very common issue that's often misdiagnosed as a bad AC compressor. In my case, the AC would not get cold on startup or driving in traffic, but would get quite cold when driving at highway speeds. Unfortunately, even though it's extremely easy to switch the solenoid out, which is located on the side of the AC compressor, safely capturing the refrigerant and refilling the system after the fact does increase the difficulty of this project. To safely capture the old refrigerant, call around to your local repair shops and you may find one that will recycle the old refrigerant for free. Now that the system is evacuated of refrigerant, the tools you'll need for this job are a 10mm socket and ratchet, a pair of snap ring pliers, a slotted screwdriver, a kitchen scale for measuring refrigerant, a thick glove, a vacuum pump, and R134A manifold gauges that can usually be borrowed for free from most major auto parts stores. You'll also need a refrigerant can tap for self-sealing cans if the gauge set doesn't come with it. Your system should be charged with R134A, but just to make sure, check the sticker on the underside of the hood and it will tell you, as well as the system capacity and oil type. This system calls for 650 plus or minus 25 grams, which with two 12-ounce cans at 340 grams apiece will put you barely over the maximum refrigerant capacity. There's also PAG oil in this AC system, but the loss of oil should be negligible when just swapping out the solenoid. But keep that in mind if you do any major repairs to the system. Like I mentioned earlier, most major auto parts stores do offer free specialty tool rental for tools like this vacuum pump and the manifold gauge set. You initially pay full MSRP for the loaner tool, then get a full refund when you return it. Make sure the vacuum pump has enough oil in it, or else you'll need to add more to be able to fully pull a vacuum. If the gauge set comes disassembled like mine did, you can easily put it together just by matching up the colors. Attach the red quick connect to the red hose, then thread it onto the manifold below the red valve. Then attach the quick connect to the side of the manifold to keep it clean. Do the same for the blue hose, making sure that both the quick connect valves are all the way counterclockwise and the manifold valves are closed clockwise. Lastly, attach the yellow hose in the center. Let's get started by verifying the refrigerant system pressure is at 0 before pulling the old solenoid, just to be safe. First, take off the high pressure port cap and connect the red hose. Turn the knob clockwise to open. Don't over tighten as it can damage the Schrader valve inside. Do the same for the blue low side hose. Don't worry about getting these mixed up because the ports are different sizes and will only fit the correct side. As you can see, even though the refrigerant was all extracted, the short drive from the mechanic shop to my house warmed up the system enough for it to be slightly above atmospheric pressure. So I'm going to crack the valves to drop the system to 0 before moving down to the solenoid. The solenoid can be accessed by removing the 10mm bolts from the front of the engine splash shield, both on the passenger side and in the middle. Looking up at the AC compressor next to the oil filter, slide the wire connector off of the solenoid. Use snap ring pliers to pinch and remove the internal retaining ring, then use a slotted screwdriver to pry the old solenoid valve out of the compressor. After it's broken loose, it should be easy to remove it the rest of the way with your fingers. Check to make sure the old outer O-ring wasn't left behind inside the compressor. Here's the new solenoid that I'll be replacing it with. Link in the description below. Make sure to wash your hands prior to taking it out of the bag. With clean hands or gloves, lubricate the new O-rings prior to installation. Also, I found it easier to take off the largest O-ring to insert it first into the compressor before carefully installing the new solenoid. It's a tight fit, so take your time getting it to go past the O-ring. Once it's started, make sure the plug is aligned down and to the left before pressing it in place with your fingers, fully seating it into the compressor. Use the snap ring pliers to reinsert the retaining ring, then reconnect the wiring connector. Now that we're done underneath, it's time to reinstall the 10mm bolts that hold the splash shield up and move up to the top to recharge the refrigerant. Before the refrigerant can be added, it's first necessary to pull a vacuum on the AC system to remove any air and moisture. Connect the yellow hose to the vacuum pump and make sure that any other vacuum ports are sealed off on the pump. Also, the loaner manifold gauge set that I was using had a Schrader valve on the front port without a cap that wasn't allowing me to pull a vacuum. So I had to borrow the cap from the vacuum pump to seal it off. With the manifold gauge set connected and all valves open, turn on the vacuum pump and watch for it to drop down to the negative 30 psi mark on the low side. This helps to remove any moisture because water will actually boil and turn to steam in a vacuum environment, even at room temperature. So to make sure it has removed all the moisture in the system, continue to let the vacuum pump run for an additional 15 to 30 minutes. After letting the vacuum pump run, first close both valves on the manifold before turning off the vacuum pump. Now it's time to wait another 30 minutes to verify that there aren't any leaks in the system before recharging. If, after the leak down test, the low side is still at negative 30, you're good to start recharging. If the system vacuum has dropped, there might be another issue with your cooling system that's beyond the scope of this video. But first, verify all your connections are tight, and then try the leak down test again. To recharge, unscrew the yellow hose from the vacuum pump and grab the can tap. Make sure the valve is all the way up by turning clockwise and connect the yellow hose to the side port. Screw on the first can of R134A and turn the tap most of the way counterclockwise until it opens the self-sealing valve inside the can. Verify the can is open and bleed off any air in the yellow line by holding the can upside down, then with a gloved hand cracking the coupling on the manifold side, closing it quickly as soon as you see refrigerant. Although this system should be fine adding 2 full cans, accounting for some loss in the manifold lines, I'm going to be using the kitchen scale here to get a rough weight to keep track of how much refrigerant I'm adding into the system. This setup isn't nearly as accurate as a professional system, but it's going to be close enough for what I need. Now with a car in a well-ventilated area, and if inside a garage like this, using some sort of fan for extra ventilation, open all the doors or roll down all the windows, start the car, and turn the air conditioning system on max AC at max fan speed. When I checked the temp before adding any refrigerant, it showed that the system was blowing at roughly the same as the ambient temperature of 76 degrees Fahrenheit. Now it's time to open the blue side valve to start adding refrigerant. Per the directions on the can, keep the can upright, rotating back and forth between the 12 o'clock and 3 o'clock positions every 2 to 3 seconds, while continually shaking the can back and forth. Use a thick glove to hold the can if it starts getting too cold. It'll take around 5 to 15 minutes to add the contents of one can. Once it feels empty, turn it upside down for 1 more minute to make sure that every bit of the refrigerant has been emptied from the can. Now I'm going to weigh the empty can to get the total that I added from one can to see how much I still need to add to the system. With an initial weight of 586 grams minus the empty weight of 244 equals 342 grams. Which is almost exactly what it should be according to the label. Now taking 650 grams that this system needs and subtracting how much we just added gives us 308 grams that we still need to add. Now it's time to turn off the blue valve on the manifold before switching cans. Not absolutely necessary with the post-2018 self-sealing cans, but just as an extra safety step. Also, screw the tap knob all the way clockwise to allow the empty can to reseal and prep for the next can. If your can tap has a check valve like this one, you're ready to swap over to the next can. Then tap the can by turning the knob back most of the way counterclockwise until it opens the self-sealing valve inside the can. The check valve in the can tap will prevent having to repurge air from the yellow line after swapping cans like you would with a pre-2018 can. Now for a little bit of math to get to exactly 650 grams. Like I said before, you should be okay adding the whole second can, but if you're like me and want it to be right on spec, take the full weight of the second can, which in this case is 573, and subtract the 308 we still need to add from before. That gives us a target weight of 265 grams that the second can will need to weigh for us to have exactly 650 grams of R134A in the system. Thankfully, the spec includes a variance of plus or minus 25 grams, so any inaccuracies in measuring with a hose hanging off the table like this won't matter. So open the blue low side valve again with the engine still running and continue to tilt and shake this can just like before. As it's going in, I am watching the gauges rise, but filling this system is based on refrigerant weight and not pressure, so the pressures don't really mean as much when filling the system from empty. This time, as the can is getting close to empty, I'm going to keep checking the weight. I still wasn't quite down to 265 grams when it started to feel empty, so I did have to turn it upside down to continue filling. At the next weight check, it was right on my target weight for a total of 650 grams in the system. Now that the system is full, first turn off the blue valve. Then, before taking off the lines to the high and low side ports, turn the knobs counterclockwise, then disconnect the quick connect coupling. Reattach the couplings to the manifold to keep them clean after taking them off the car, and reinstall the protective caps on each port. Moving back to the can tap, turn the knob all the way clockwise before taking it off the can. If you do have a loaner manifold and need to completely disassemble it before taking it back, I would recommend putting on gloves before taking off any of the hoses. High pressure refrigerant is dangerous and can cause cold injuries or frostbite if it comes in direct contact with the skin. Also, take off the hoses outside since there will be a small amount of refrigerant trapped inside. Initially, after refilling the refrigerant, I was getting 54 degrees at the vent, a drop of 22 degrees, which is very respectable with all the doors open. Parking it outside and letting it run for about 5 minutes on max AC made me wonder if I needed to be dodging snowballs when I climb back inside, with a vent temperature of just 34 degrees. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please click the like button below and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Leave any questions or comments in the comment section below, and check out my Optima playlist for more videos on Kia Optima maintenance.